Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome. We're back. Access to Democracy is back. Alan Miller is back. Joe Atkins is back. And he hasn't been here for a while, but Joe is one of the leaders of our House of Representatives in the legislature. What can I tell you about Joe Atkins? He's completing his 6th term as a legislator, one of the key legislators who the governor looks to for assistance in some of his programs. You were the youngest school board member in the country. You were the youngest mayor of a city in the country. You were one of the youngest below 40 picked to be a great success. What happened?
I grew up. I got old. All this gray hair started. I was going to ask you. I think you're leading me in the gray hair category. But,
I'm leading everybody in the gray hair category.
It's always nice to be back with you, Alan.
Well, it's good to have you here. You have been doing so much with healthcare and the premiums and things like that. Let's start with that, because certainly it's an issue. It's an issue nationally. We're in much better shape in the state than the federals are. So let's talk about that.
Well, thank God we kept it local. Would be what I'd start off with. Obviously, with the Affordable Care Act kicking in and health insurance exchanges being required across the country, Minnesota was faced with a big choice a couple of years ago. We either could develop our own health insurance marketplace, or we could let the federal government create one for us and impose it upon us. And we opted to keep it local. I mean, Minnesota's got a heck of a healthcare system.
Well,
and,
there was an article recently that said that we have the lowest premiums in the country. I don't know that that's so, because New York claims that they do, but that's New York. They claim they have the best of everything.
New York had the biggest drop in premiums because they had some awfully high premiums to begin with. But no, there's no argument. Minnesota has the lowest on our health insurance exchange on MNsure, by far the lowest insurance rates in the country. And it's interesting, all you got to do, and why it was so important to keep it local, if you look at what Wisconsin opted to do, they decided to go with the federal route and have a federal health insurance exchange.
Some of the Republican legislators are screaming this week, why can't we have what Minnesota has? Well, the fact of the matter is, if you had a governor who had half a brain, you could have what Minnesota has. Or maybe that's what he does have, is half a brain. I don't know. I'm not a big Walker fan.
Really, so, I never would have taken that from your comments, sir. But no, I got a lot of family in Wisconsin, and I genuinely feel bad for them. Their rates are 88% higher than what we're seeing here in Minnesota. I mean, if it was 8 or 10% or something like that, you could maybe argue that it was just some difference. But
getting close to twice as much as what the people are paying here.
Almost twice as much, and that's when you're talking about health insurance. I mean, that's just it's something that people need. And if you're an entrepreneur, a small business person, trying to provide that for your employees and things like that, they also don't have small business plans available on their exchange. They're just not ready to do that at the federal level yet, so Wisconsin doesn't have that either. But we've been real pleased with how the rates came in here in Minnesota.
Yeah, and I mean, I had an episode in April where I was in Fairview Ridges for a day and a half. The bill came to $8,800 for what they had to do. Now, that would not have been covered in some of the other states. the way it was here. The only thing I had to pay was $150, and that was for pinching nurses. So.
I was going to ask you how much of that $8,800 was due to your behavior.
No,
but,
the 150 was due to my behavior, and the rest of it was really picked up. It makes a big, big difference. And you've also been very active with school districts. And in 6 terms, I mean, you have risen to prominence in the legislature, where your name is connected to a lot of things. You introduced 19 bills this year, which, as the person who introduces them, is a lot. And how many of those passed?
Yeah, I was going to say, though, it's anybody can introduce a bill. The key is you got to get it passed. And I was telling my wife I got the same batting average as Big Papi had in the World Series.
Hey, that's not terrible.
Over 700 batting average. I don't believe in introducing bills just for the sake of introducing bills. I think they've got to be important legislation. They got to be worth passing. You got to be willing to work to get them passed. So a dozen of my, and by the way, it's a 2-year session, so I still got next year to finish passing the remainder of the bills. And one of the things I'm most proud of.
Are you running again?
I don't know. Shoot, it's a 2-year term, Alan. I at least get a little breathing time before I have to make an announcement. And that's, on that point, one of the reasons I like being in the House is because a lot of my colleagues don't like a 2-year term. I love having a 2-year term because if you run out of gas or you're not enjoying it, and you've got a 4-year term, that's a long time to watch somebody go through the motions. And in the House, you got to make that decision every couple of years. I still have a lot of passion for it. I love what I'm doing. I love the people that I'm helping. And the bills that I've authored, granted, some are passing on a partisan basis, but I just found out I passed more bipartisan bills in the last 6 years than any other state representative. So, kind of a good deal.
That says you talk to people on the other side and they listen.
It's just practical. It's not just because I like being bipartisan, but all you got to do is walk about 50 feet to the other side of the aisle in order to find out what people care about.
A lot of people in this very partisan structure that seems to be dominating the country don't do that. And, they forget the oath of office, which should transcend everything else. And they don't do that. I mean, the governor has had a lot of mud thrown at him. And yet, we have brought down the deficit here in this state. We like it or not, and I'm going to ask you about the Viking Stadium, have passed a bill for the Viking Stadium. We have the Twins hosting the All-Star team. Maybe no twin on the All-Star team, but...
a lot of former Twins
on
those All-Star teams.
Isn't it interesting how many players that we let go someplace else and become an All-Star? And I'm thinking of even Michael Kadire, who we should have never let go and led the National League in batting this year. And
what was it?
David Ortiz
like
and
7 or 8 or 9 former
Craig
Twins.
Breslow and Matt Garza and Kyle Loesch. And,
you're impressing me, Miller. You're actually a little more well-rounded than I thought. I'm impressed.
Well, I just lost 20 pounds. I'm not as well-rounded as I used to be.
Maybe you're not quite as well-rounded.
But you did. You passed. That's quite an accomplishment. More bipartisan bills than anybody in the legislature.
Well, and I think it's important to do that. I mean, it's in most of the time that I've served, it hasn't been Democrats in control. This is the first time in the 12 years or 11 years that I've been in the House that it's been Democrats in charge of the House, Senate, and the governor's office. And even with that situation, I find it important to find out what the interests are across the aisle. Before we're Democrats or Republicans, we're Minnesotans. And I think a lot of times what gets lost...
Should be that way anyway.
Well, you would, and you know what, it really is true. I look at the poor folks at the federal level now, and I don't think they have that sense anymore.
No.
They go there and they get so entrenched, and then we see what we've seen here in the last couple months. I might add, I like to point out wherever I go, I serve in the Minnesota House in St. Paul, and not, I had one of the moms at my daughter's soccer game a few weeks, and she's a very bright woman, but she came up and she put her hand on my shoulder or my arm, and she said, Joe, I just wanted to tell you what a great dad you are. Flying back from Washington, D.C. twice a week to be at Katie's. And I didn't have the heart to break it to her that I don't go to D.C. But I sure hope folks understand that we're up at the state capitol here in Minnesota in St. Paul, and it really is, in spite of what you may see on the news sometimes. They like to show when we're battling it out. I bet you 95% of the work that we do is on a bipartisan or even a nonpartisan basis. It's just good
the
for
way
the
it
state.
should be.
It is, and that's
Minnesota,
the best part of the job.
Minnesota is a unique state in that regard, among others. And what people also don't understand, they say, oh, the legislature, they meet from January to May. But you people are in your office year-round, and committees are meeting year-round, and conferences are being held year-round. And,
although a number of us still try, I think there's about half of us now, I'm among those, that still try to keep a full-time job as well. I practice law in South St. Paul every day, even when we're in session, Alan. I stop at my law office in the morning, then I go down to the Capitol. Sometimes I head back to the law office yet again late at night. But I represent clients as well, and I want to do a good job for them. And I do believe in the concept of a citizen legislature. I think it's important to have farmers and lawyers and teachers and folks from all walks of life that come and serve at the Capitol.
Well, yeah, because it gives you some perspective.
It does.
Of,
it really does.
What the problems are across the board.
Yep.
So talk about these strides that you took in terms of schools this session, or this half session.
This was a great year for schools. And we should start with actually one of the things that wasn't going very well. 2 years ago, we took out a loan from our schools, over a $2 billion loan to balance the state budget. It was like balancing the state's budget on a credit card.
And it wasn't the first time.
And it wasn't the first time, and quite frankly, I didn't vote for it. I argued as vigorously as I could against it. I voted no, but I still take responsibility for it. So when Democrats took control, that was one of the things. There were a number of us that wanted to make that priority one. We ought to get that loan paid back.
Well, you say you take responsibility for it when you had no control over it, when that was part of the Pawlenty agenda. But you're the only one I know who would take out an ad or issue a statement apologizing to the people, even though you had no control over it, and I know you did that.
Well, and you know what? You're making me sound like a better person than I really am. I think we all got to take responsibility for. If you're part of a football team, if you're part of a baseball team, it doesn't matter whether you're the guy hitting 733 or the guy hitting 143. You're part of that team.
Because when my contract comes
for
up,
it. Maybe on an individual basis it does. But at the end of the day, we're all in that legislature together, Democrats and Republicans. It doesn't really matter. But there was a $2 billion loan that had to get paid back. The last time that happened, back in the early 90s, it took 15 years before our schools got paid back, before they got made whole. And I just didn't feel like we could let that happen this time. So we're now this close to having it fully paid back. I expect we're within $200 million, so we got 90% of it paid back. I expect by the spring of next year we'll have the whole thing paid off.
And that's incredible for that big a loan, and for money that the school districts needed desperately, which led to levies and
some of them
assessments.
went into short-term borrowing mode.
Yeah.
Many of them were already in a tough spot. Now they had to go out into the
and
market.
interest rates kicked up as a result of it.
It was not a wise.
And who suffers but the people in the district? So.
And that's exactly right. I mean,
but that was voodoo mathematics. No new taxes, so we'll get the money from elsewhere. But it's still money that you have to get to run the government, and it's still money that has to be paid back when you borrow it.
Yeah, well, and it doesn't matter. My dad used to say that it doesn't matter whether you take it out of my left pocket or my right pocket. If it's coming out of my pants, it's something that is costing me money. And so what a lot was happening was it was being pushed down to the local taxpayers, and it was measures like that huge borrowing. So we're getting that paid back. And then for the first time in several years, we also improved the amount of money that's going to our local school districts.
Which is a big thing.
It's a very big thing.
And you also put a cap on how much it costs in terms of college tuition, which is really a big thing because it was getting prohibitive to go to school, including the Minsky schools, one of which I teach in. So,
Well, and that's supposed to be the gateway. You know, I mean, the Inver Hills Community Colleges, the Dakota County Technical Schools, Metro State, and so many terrific institutions that are supposed to be that first step for a kid to get that college degree, or somebody who's going back to retrain. And what was happening was folks were being priced out of that. And then our flagship, you know, the University of Minnesota,
absolutely.
prices just kept going up. So for the first time in a long time, we've actually been able to hold tuition.
Well, our crack staff here today is primarily Minneapolis Community and Technical College, and
so then I'm saying the right thing today.
you're saying the right
I can
thing.
make it out of here alive.
They're smiling. The cameras are smiling back at
But
us.
it's you know, it's an investment, though. I mean, I know it's cliche to say that, but when a young person or somebody looking to go back and get additional training can't afford to do that, it costs all of us. And I know that sometimes that message gets overplayed, perhaps, but it truly is an investment. And what attracts businesses to here in Minnesota and causes them to expand here in Minnesota, it's not the weather, for heaven's sakes. It's the fact that we've got such a terrific workforce, an educated workforce, and it's truly an investment.
And certainly, what's the nurse staffing disclosure and study bill?
Patient protection is what it amounts to. We've got
That was another one of your bills.
we heard it is another. It's a bill that I authored working with Minnesota's nurses, and we heard a lot of scary stories about staffing related issues that were arising in some of our hospitals, and you had an opportunity to be in one not too long ago.
We got great care,
Most of the care, by the way, is terrific. The times when the care suffers is when you have situations arising where you've got that one nurse or a couple nurses, and all of a sudden all heck is breaking loose around them, and the staffing ratios are off. And we heard testimony after testimony from nurses themselves, talking about situations at various hospitals. And so we've done two things. Number one is there's going to be a disclosure. And by the way, the hospitals bought into this. At first, they were pushing back quite strenuously. But eventually we worked with them on a two-prong approach. One is they're going to disclose what those staffing levels are. So as a consumer, as a patient, you can see what sort of situation you're getting into at each various hospital across Minnesota. And then secondly, they're working with the Department of Health, the nurses, the hospitals, and the Department of Health to look at what are the optimal staffing levels, patient to nurse. And hopefully that's going to improve care and protect patients for not just today, but for years to come.
And Minnesota has a great reputation because of its health care, because of the Mayo Clinic, which is going to practically double in size in the next few years, and certainly worldwide recognition, so very important. How do you feel about the Viking Stadium?
Well,
I know you're an athlete.
I'll tell you what.
Well, you used to be an athlete.
Yeah, you're going to give me a hard time now, aren't you? Because
Tell us how you damaged your Achilles tendon.
Well, I still think of myself as I was playing basketball, and I had that. What a number of my friends have had the same thing, where they fully tore my Achilles. I literally was having the best day I've had at basketball in ages. I've been
playing with your sons who can run rings around you?
Actually playing with a lot of young staff folks at Humboldt High School in St. Paul, including one. He was Mr. Wisconsin in basketball some years back, guys who are way better than me, Alan. But I was having one of those mornings, I couldn't miss a shot. So this poor guy that usually guards me from 5 feet away actually had to guard me up close. And I drove around him to the right. I made first layup I've made in probably 5 years. And then I decided I'm going to drive to my left. I never drive to my left. My Republican friends would tell me not to drive to my left.
Right.
But I pushed off, went to my left, and heard that pop, that audible popping sound. Felt like somebody had pushed me down from behind, and then my foot just kind of... And so off to the ER I went and got her surgically put back together, and now it's 3 months later. I'm doing great. I'm riding my bike and I'm starting to run again and doing all that stuff.
And you don't play basketball anymore?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
That's part of the point of doing this. People think I'm nuts for saying that.
It's interesting because I was recently at the community center here and took a basketball and went out to take some shots. The basket is much higher than when I was in school.
I found the same to be the case. there was one time I actually touched the rim, but that was a long,
The only way I would
long
touch the
time
rim
ago.
was with a ladder.
But no, it's a lot of fun. But on that stadium, and I'll tell you one thing for sure. I'm really glad that it's behind us. Every year that I've been in the legislature for the last 11, and before I even got there, there have been stadium bill after stadium bill after stadium bill. And one of the healthy things that came out of this discussion is that there's been a small group now appointed to try to deal with some of these stadium issues ahead of time, rather than under the gun. And hopefully that'll make some progress. Otherwise, I'm glad we've got the stadium done, but I also want to make sure that that it's carried out in the right way. I don't know who I made mad, but the speaker appointed me to the oversight commission. So one of my roles
Good.
now is, and we've been meeting a lot lately, and our job is to kind of keep an eye on things and make sure the budget is right.
A reputation as somebody who is tight with the buck in terms of the people's buck, and that's a good thing.
I'm actually, and my wife has said this, I'm tighter with the other people's money than I am with my own. That may sound strange, but I feel a greater sense of responsibility over handling other people's money than I figure that my money, I earn my own money, I can do with it what I want.
That's the kind of an attitude that brought down the deficit, that paid back some of the money that we should have never borrowed in the first place.
That's why Minnesota's in such a phenomenal position now. I mean, we literally were leading the country on just about every metric that you can. Unemployment is ours is now 5.1%. Nationally, it's 3% higher. Right across the way in Wisconsin, they're at about 7%. Things are, and Forbes just ranked us the 8th best place for business in the country. There's a lot of really good things going on here in Minnesota.
And you also had some responsibility for what they call the Hannah Montana bill. What was that?
That was some years ago. There was there were folks taking advantage of ticket buyers using this electronic software. And I'm not who is Hannah Montana now? Miley Cyrus, right?
Something like that.
I think so. And I wouldn't say that I'm not a fan, but I'm not a huge fan. I don't know a whole lot about her music, but what I do know is that you shouldn't be allowed to cut in line when you're buying a ticket, whether it's a baseball ticket or a concert ticket or anything else. And folks are using this electronic software to cut to the front of the line, buy up all of the concert tickets, or all of the baseball tickets, or all of the football tickets, and then they would turn around and sell them for, in that case of the Hannah Montana concerts,
a large profit.
10 times what the face value was, 10 times what they were paying for them by using this. It was called BOTS software. And so we made that software illegal here in Minnesota, and now a number of states across the country have followed our lead. Because it's just not fair to allow people. You wouldn't allow it at the school bus stop, and you shouldn't allow it when it comes to ticket buying.
What do you think about the monitoring of phone calls that we are experiencing right now?
I don't know that I could say in any greater fashion how much I disapprove of it. There will be folks that will talk about it's needed for national security and so forth, but there's certain basic freedoms. If you can identify, and you get a court order and so forth, if you can identify people that have a pattern of engaging, certainly if they're terrorists or something along those lines.
Every time we say something that affects the NSA, this light over my
noticed
shoulder
that light seems
is
to be
blinking on
flashing.
and off. Their listening device is not functioning that well.
Yeah, but last I checked, we live in America. And in America, you have certain rights that maybe you don't have in the rest of the world, but you sure do have them here.
We used to have 10 amendments in the Bill of Rights. Certainly the Fourth Amendment, search and seizure,
right.
The necessity to get a warrant. Those things haven't gone out of the amendment, haven't gone out of the Fourth Amendment. But I hear people talking about it as though it doesn't exist. A lot of the Patriot Act really infringes on the First and Fourth Amendments. And I don't see how people, particularly people who are responsible, legislators, possibly can countenance it.
Yeah. No, I think it's a cop-out, what folks are doing. They're by the way, why don't you ever have John Klein on your program?
John won't come back anymore.
Because some of these issues have been, whether it's national security or it's been the budget
John was
stuff.
on this program over 36 times. We're in our 15th year now. We've done 1,500 plus of these interviews. John was here 36 times, and I guess it was 4 years ago, I said that I think John is doing a cop-out because he wouldn't debate his opponent, who he crushed anyway, who he had so much money, who couldn't possibly deal with him. And John got very insulted. I would love to have John back. If you can use your influence with Klein.
I called him during the shutdown, and just, I saw everything on the news, and I thought there's got to be more to the story. So I thought I'd just call him directly and find out what his perspective. And it was a very valuable phone call. We talked for about a half an hour. I give him a lot of credit.
He's
for
a very personable guy.
Yeah, and it was
I
good to get the
like
background.
John Klein a lot, but he really got insulted that I made that suggestion, and he hasn't been back since. So maybe it's time to bury that hatchet.
Well, you ought to get both him and Mike Obermuller on at the same time. I think it'd be
I would love
interesting.
to.
I understand they're right close percentage-wise in the polls. I don't really track the polls too much, but I read a little article about that in Pioneer Press. Apparently, they're very close now. So,
one thing I hope that perhaps you can lead the way to in this coming session, and we only have a couple minutes left, but you can talk about what we expect. I would like to see the puppy bill passed. We're one of 4 states that don't regulate these puppy mills. And we've seen probably a half dozen articles in the last year about the inhumane conditions that these animals are kept in. And I know it's been blocked by a legislator from upstate who has some of them in his district. And, he's been here before, but I don't think he'll necessarily be back. But in any event, it really is. I mean, we have a dog who's a rescue dog, and these dogs need somebody to be their champion. They are champions, and they give so much to us. And I would like to see that bill introduced again. I hope you're the person to do it.
well, and actually, I'll tell you, I can't go to a family function without hearing about it. My brother has a rescue dog who was also a champion greyhound, I might add. Won its first 3 races and then realized, why am I chasing this rabbit around a track? And then apparently lost her value. But just a peach of a dog. I think the time is ripe now.
I hope so.
For passage. But remember, Alan, the devil is in the details. I mean, we don't want to. There's good dog breeders out there.
I don't want to damage them, but and they resist registration fees. But the fact of the matter is, it enhances their business if we get the people who are charlatans out of the business.
All I'm getting at is that you sometimes have legislators that want a shortcut by just passing some blunt instrument. It's a really complicated bill that's going to pass, but I do think that the time has come, and I think if there was a session, it's likely to be in 2014 when we'll see passage.
I'm ready to work with any legislator who wants to. Now, we don't have time to talk about what's coming up in the 2014 session, so you're going to have to come back
I'd love to.
and tell us what we can anticipate. We've been talking with Joe Atkins, who is a champion in his own right and a champion of the people, District 52B. Joe, thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.